Well, at the time of the Second Vatican Council, I think the only Catholic theologian who really did make that kind of contribution from the United States was the Jesuit John Courtney Murray. I mean, Murray had been writing on issues of church and state in this country since the early 1940s. Interesting enough, Murray was a professor of dogmatic theology. I mean, he taught courses in the Trinity and in Christology when he taught at the Jesuit seminary at Woodstock, Maryland. But that ultimately Murray's primary writing interests were in this whole area of the role of the Christian in the world, and through that issue he got into the more specific issue of church and state. And Murray did a marvelous academic work in which he tried to show that the teachings, even as late as the 19th and early 20th century, that denied religious freedom, that they had to be understood in their historical and cultural circumstances. Part of the cultural circumstance, for example, was the fact that the feeling in Europe in the 19th and 20th century in favor of religious freedom came out of a continental liberalism, which ultimately said there's no public role for religion in society. Religion can only play a private role in the house and the family. It can have no effect on the broader society. And Murray's argument was the Catholic Church couldn't accept that understanding. But then Murray tried to argue, and I think successfully, that in the United States understanding of religious freedom, it wasn't the same. It didn't say there was no room for religion to affect American public life. In fact, some people might think it affects it too much, but that's another question. But nonetheless, that it does, that religion can have a role to play, but it can in society, but it cannot have a role to play in the state. So in other words, there's this broader distinction. The state is an infinitesimally small part of society. The broader public society embraces not only the state, it embraces all sorts of groups like media, colleges, universities, religion. They all have a right to try to change society, to have a role to play, kind of thing. So Murray employed what he called this historical hermeneutic to show that the Catholic Church in the 19th century condemned religious freedom because it had to in the light of the circumstances. But in the 20th century, the circumstances had changed, and we now could favor religious freedom. Now, quite frankly, as strong as an admiration as I have for John Courtney Murray, I also think his answer was a little too facile. And you see, even at the Second Vatican Council, when they discussed this issue of religious freedom, the question was not only about the issue of religious freedom, but the primary issue for many people was how could the Church teach in the 20th century what it had condemned in the 19th. Now, the historical hermeneutic that Murray applied was a marvelous way to deal with that issue. But quite frankly, I think it was too simple and too easy. I think we also have to admit there was error in the Church's teaching. At some time along the line, the Church's teaching was wrong. And there might have even been aspects of that being wrong in the 19th century. So, I mean, believe me, I'm in no way impugning Murray's motives or anything else, but it seems to me that, especially looking back on it, of course it's always easy to look back. I'm reminded of Harry Truman's autobiography where he said in the preface that an 8th grader's hindsight is better than a statesperson's foresight. But as we look back on it, had we been willing to admit then that there had been error in church teaching, then it would have made life a lot easier after the Second Vatican Council.